And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Del Vecchio here, specializing in home care, elder care planning, and the senior living industry. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Hey, just a reminder, next weekend we change our clocks. Yeah, we fall backwards by 1 hour. A little more light in the morning for the dog lovers. That will get a little more light, but a lot darker earlier in the evening. So watch out for those kiddies coming back from school. Might be a little darker starting next week. All right, I'd like to give a little shout out to financial advisors and wealth planners who are taking a more proactive role in the well-being of their clients. Many are recognizing that their role is far beyond getting the best return on your investments, although that's a crucial role. It's much more holistic these days. And I was in Toronto 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, at the Asante Wealth Management National Conference, as I was invited as a guest speaker to talk about elder care planning and navigating effective ways to deal with the aging process. And this week, I'm going to be on a national podcast with Richardson Wealth discussing what to look for in a senior living community. And that kind of triggered this particular segment. As many of our loyal listeners of Life Unrehearsed know, my team of Lianas Senior Advisors assist individuals and couples in finding the ideal senior living community. It's a free service where we gather pertinent information about existing and future needs, and we organize tours of ideal seniors residences and accompany family members on these tours while trying to provide guidance and support throughout the search process. It can be a little overwhelming with over 400 senior living communities just in Greater Montreal. Well, one of the most common questions we get is, what are the most important things to ask when visiting retirement homes and seniors residences? So I figured to dedicate a little time on today's show to provide a little insight. But first, I think in order to properly address these important questions, I'd like to break down the three types of senior living communities, as there will be different questions to ask for each one. And by the way, if you have a question about seniors residences, senior living communities, the whole process, feel free to text me at 514-790-0800. I'll give that again, 514-790-0800. Ask your question, and I'll do my best to answer it. So in terms of, in general, there's basically three types of, we'll call it retirement homes. There's different terms: residences, senior living communities. There's independent living, there's assisted living, and then there's long-term care. So I'm going to review each one with you and what questions can be asked if you had to look at either one of them. So for independent living, that's kind of the best of both worlds, I like to refer to it. It's full independence. You're going to have your own apartment, condo style. You're going to have a full kitchen, usually a 1 or 2 bedroom unit, and full access to all amenities, including things like the dining room and activities and a dépanneur and a pharmacy, and of course, access to nursing and PAB staff, orderlies, if ever required. Here are some of the questions that we like to ask when visiting on behalf of families. Now, you're going to have to sign a lease when you get into a senior living community. And so we like to ask, what's included in this rent that I'm paying? We actually like to turn it around a little bit. We like to ask what's not included in the lease. And typically things like electricity and heating and hot water are included. Sometimes internet and cable and telephone, but sometimes not. That's why we got to ask these questions. And if you need services like housekeeping or even laundry, parking, or any personal care, those are usually not included. So you need to ask the question, okay, what's not included in this lease? One of the other questions is, when do you have to renew the lease? Typically, you're going to get 3-4 months advance notice before the renewal of the lease, which is going to be in 1 year. And how can I break the lease? Okay, that's a question we get all the time, and not so easy to break a lease. Usually, if you can break a lease, it's due to health reasons, where you're living right now. You can't make it for the year due to health reasons, that they can no longer accommodate your needs, and that's one of the main reasons for that. We love to ask, what are some of the safety and security protocols? Is there a receptionist, for example, 24/7? And we always encourage, try to ask the question, can I stay for a complimentary lunch? I love this one. You could taste the food, get a real feel for the menu, but also a feel for the culture of where you are. We love doing that. You get to see the people. I'd love to ask for feedback from residents. That's always important. And sometimes, there's going to be a good calendar of activities and the menu. You want to ask for those. So those are little important questions for independent living. Now, the next stage is called assisted living. You could ask a lot of those same questions as I previously mentioned, but if you're looking for assisted living, you probably have some additional care requirements. So it's important to reinforce the questions of what's included and not included in the rent. And in assisted living, though, just for your reference, you're typically going to get all your meals, your housekeeping, and your laundry. Sometimes there's weekly bathing and medication management in assisted living. There's usually, though, additional costs if you need higher personal care. An example, you need help with transferring if there's some mobility issues, or dressing and undressing, or if there's incontinence management and accompaniment to the dining room or activities. Those are usually additional costs which are offered in assisted living, but you just want to make sure when you get a quote, you're including what does it cost for those additional care levels. I like to ask what's the staff to resident ratio. Always an important question. You want to make sure there's enough staff for everyone. And you can also, while talking about staff, how is their training? What were they trained on to be in assisted living? And then regarding the type of apartment in assisted living, it's usually a private room with your own bathroom. Not always, sometimes shared. But most are studios. And I bring that to your attention because it's difficult to find a 1 or 2 bedroom option in assisted living. All right, listening to Life Unrehearsed, Matt Del Vecchio here, and I'm talking about the important questions to ask when looking for a senior living community. And besides independent living and assisted living, there's long-term care. So in general, long-term care means that you require the highest levels of care, and that usually means more than 3 hours of care a day. You probably have some significant physical, mobility, and neurocognitive challenges, such as Alzheimer's. We had Dr. Noriega talking about some of Alzheimer's and the advancements in Alzheimer's earlier in the show. And there are 2 types of long-term care residences, private and public. There are several private options that can provide long-term care, but they can be expensive. There's a high amount of labor in long-term care. So, it could range anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 a month for private long-term care, but they do exist, less and less, but they are there. And then, of course, a public nursing home is what we refer to as a CHSLD, Centre d'hébergement de soins de longue durée, or a ressource intermédiaire. Those are the public nursing homes. The cost, by the way, is $2,198 per month in a public nursing home. That's what it costs the nursing home. In fact, it costs about $9,000 per bed. It's taxpayers that fund the difference of the $7,000 per bed. So, regarding the questions to ask for long-term care, you do want to ask again: staff to resident ratio. Can they establish a care plan? We need overnight support in some cases, or if there's a flight risk and wandering. What are the visiting hours? What's the communication protocols with family? And of course, the ability to take a tour before making a final decision. So those are just some of the important questions for long-term care. Now, quickly want to get to a few texts that are coming in. One says, what about waiting lists? So I'll respond to that. Let's tackle public, okay? Public residences, unfortunately, there is much more demand than there is availability. So in public nursing homes, you're looking at anywhere from a 1 to 3 year waiting list. In the private sector, in independent living, if you're looking for 1 bedroom, the odds are you can get in immediately. 2 bedrooms in independent living are a little tougher, some waiting lists for 2 bedrooms. And assisted living, it will depend where, but there's usually availability in assisted living. And if there isn't, it's not a long waiting list for assisted living because there's higher turnover. So you're looking generally, 1 to 2 months for assisted living. All right, I have time very quickly. Actually, we are out of time. So I do have to head out to traffic. Boy, it flew by, and I appreciate your text. And due to the number of texts, I'll be bringing this topic up in the new year.